Hey, welcome back to the Believe You Are a Good Mom podcast. And I have an extra super duper special guest today because I always say the guests are special. But I got to tell you that when I say believe you are a good mom, I, in my head, know that Crystal is very influential in me believing that I am a good mom. And so I'm very excited to introduce her to you. Actually, I'll let her introduce herself and then we'll get into it.
Okay. All right. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Crystal, the parenting coach. And in my work life, I combine connection-based, attachment-based principles to life coaching tools, emotion tools, meditation, mindfulness, stuff like that. And I got to that through my own journey of having a difficult parenting time. I wanted to parent in this way for a long time, knew about these kind of parenting modalities. Some people call them conscious parenting or positive parenting or, I don't know, gentle parenting. And as I learned more about it, the more I wanted to do that, but felt like I was kind of failing in the doing of it. And I had some kids that made it pretty difficult that now have been diagnosed with some things, but it wasn't really them or their diagnosis that made parenting difficult. It was me and the healing that I needed to go through. So it was through my own healing and my own kind of work that I was able to change that. And over time, entirely changed my parenting, but also noticed that their behaviors significantly improved also, and their ability to regulate themselves and be calm and confident and just amazing kids happened through the changes that happened with me. So that is what I help parents with now. I mostly work with moms, but I also work with couples. And I just started doing in-person retreats at fairy tale playhouse cabins in Canada. So that's also been a super fun addition.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so a couple things. Well, first of all, so I wanted to become a parenting life coach because I was tapped into like parenting coaches and all the tools there and life coaches and all the tools there. And I was like, somebody needs to mix those together, plus like combine like the kick of like Jesus, because people would be like, how do you do it? And I'm like, I don't know, Jody and Jesus. Cause like, that's all I would say is like my life coach and like, my like belief in Jesus Christ and the gospel and all of that is like what helped me make it through the day. Right. And I didn't know of anybody who had like combined those things. And so I was like, I guess I'll do it. And then I got, certified at the life coach school and met a lot more coaches. And I was like, oh, Crystal's already doing it. So I'll just let her do it. And
because there only needs to be one parenting coach in the world.
I know, because there's like only a few parents. One person can handle it. And so I joined her program because I was like, she's like a year ahead of me in her journey, like in her business. And like, I want to learn like how she's doing things or whatever. Plus, like, I totally needed a parenting coach. And so I joined her program and I was just like drowning in imposter syndrome. I'm like, how am I supposed to help people with their parenting when I'm like I don't have this figured out yet. And so we'll get into that in a second. But first, I just wanted to say something else, which I can't remember now. Oh, yeah. So when you become a parent, you have no idea what you're doing, right? And so you read all the books and now like you get on Instagram and follow all the like the influencers that are telling you that you're doing it wrong and all the things. And so that's how I ingested it all. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm reading this book. I'm like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. I have to do it this way. And then I read another book and I'm like, they don't even agree. And I'm like, how am I supposed to know what to do when there's like 100 different messages coming at me? And so I called my sister who already had like a million kids when I started having kids. And she would say, throw that book away. She would like try to empower me, but I was like so clung on to like somebody else as an expert. And so that's another thing Crystal really helped me with is to like empower myself that I can be my own parenting expert. And
intuition is where it's at. And when you tap into that, then you create your own unique way of parenting, and it will be connection based because when we tap into that, it always is. But it also will be so unique to you, and we won't shame ourselves so much when we make mistakes because we'll realize that it's not perfection. That perfection doesn't have anything to do with this kind of parenting style. It's just continuously trying and healing and working on it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So we're going to get into all of that. But first, one more thing about your intro. Like in 100 different places just from your intro. So it wasn't the kids, right?
Yeah.
And so it's an amazing, beautiful setup that God has given us, that he puts us down here. And then we have kids to like reparent ourselves, you know, because it brings up all of our childhood wounds when they're triggering us. And we want them to just behave so that we can feel better. And I feel like a lot of like the parenting techniques or whatever that I was learning, it was like, let's control the kids so that we can, we're a good parent or whatever.
That's how it was up until, the last probably 2 decades was the very first book that I read that said it did a different way of parenting, maybe about 20 years ago or so. And in the last like 10, 15 years, it's been getting a little bit more popular. There's a few more books, a few more people talking about it. And especially in the last 2 to 3 years, I think it's even more, but it's still definitely not the norm. I think I see people parenting around me. I talk to people about parenting a lot, even people locally. It's definitely not what is being traditionally done in parenting. It's a lot more of control the child, change the child, manipulate their behavior. I call it behavior modification, but let's focus on behavior modification. And that's what everyone seems to be focusing on. Especially if you have a child that's neurodiverse, you'll notice that if you get any support through the government or any programs, and I know this is true in the US and in Canada, that they're all behavior based, that it's all based on let's change this behavior that's maladaptive of your child through like behavior modification, rewards and punishments, and just, forced ignoring. There's lots of different things that they use. And I know a lot of people that go into that approach with their kids and really feel like something's not meshing for them. Like inside, they're like, I just don't love this. Like there's something really not aligned here, but they don't totally know what that is or how to change it. So, I think this is the parenting approach that does change that. But I do think that not a lot of people still know about it. I still think it's in its like baby years.
Yeah, which is fun, to be leading the movement, right?
Yeah.
And so then that's why like the life coaching tools really like clicked for me, is because all of the parent coaching tools, it was like the action line. And then life coaching, you realize like, but we need to get that thought feeling combination that's driving the action dialed in ourselves and in our kids. So that was another thing that you talk about a lot, is co-regulation. And so we just want our kids to like calm down because they're riling us up, because mirror neurons are a real thing, right? Yeah. And then, but to take advantage of the mirror neurons in the other way. And so I'm all about like, self-regulation. And then once we're regulated, then we can like co-regulate with our kid. But like, there's a lot of like parenting experts and things that mention that in passing, and then they move on and they talk a lot about all the rest of the stuff. And I'm like, I'm way back here on self-regulation. Like, how do I do that?
Well, there's no way back here. I think that's it. Like, I literally think that's the only thing we need to learn.
Exactly.
And I think that we often get stuck up on there being a bunch of things we need to learn in this kind of parenting style, but I think most of it is our own regulation. And when we talk about co-regulation, one of the things that people get mixed up is that they think that co-regulation means I sit with my child and I help my child breathe, and I tell my child to calm down, and I tell my child that it's going to be okay. And I read them a book about like colors and feelings and I give them a feelings wheel and I'm like, here, pick your emotion, right? None of that is co-regulation. Co-regulation is me maintaining my calm, me turning inwards and noticing what's happening for me. And in the process of me doing that for me, they're able to calm down. And by calm down, I mean, like, it might take them a while. It might look differently than it looks like for you. And this is normal. This is actually how we teach self-regulation. It's not through reading the books and talking to them about it and getting them squeeze balls and like glitter jars to look at when they're freaking out. It's actually us being able to do that for them. And then over time, at around 12 or so, they start to shift where they can usually self-regulate a little bit more than co-regulate. If you have a child that's highly sensitive or has a diagnosis, it's going to take a little bit longer. And then even at 12, they're still using a lot of co-regulation up until adulthood, when their prefrontal cortex is fully developed, and then they're able to self-regulate. And this is if like all of the emotional developmental phases have been met throughout the lifespan, which doesn't often happen because we don't usually have that good, healthy, nurturing, attachment-based environment. And so that's like in an ideal world. That's what would happen.
Which we did not grow up in. So
yes,
we are
we didn't grow up in.
Have a prefrontal cortex, and we still are pitching fits just like our toddlers because
we don't have it. And so it's like noticing we weren't given that. So being okay with our own development and growth in that area.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Let's jump into what I wanted to talk to you about, which is called the 10 out of 10 mom.
Okay.
So first of all, so this is the origin story podcast, right? And so my origin story is that I always wanted to be a mom, right? This is how I tell the story. I always wanted to be a mom, but then once I was a mom, it didn't feel like I was living the dream. It felt more like a nightmare. And I was just kind of drowning in it. And like I said, reading books and using them against myself because I'm not doing it right. So then I'm like so buried in like all the guilt and shame and all the things that I like couldn't even see straight, right? And so I was just like irritated, annoyed, frustrated all the time. My husband's like, "What's your motivation for?" I'm like, I don't, anyway, enter life coaching, right? By baby number 3, I finally found life coaching. And then I'm like, oh, are you sure that feelings come from thoughts? Because it just felt like a reflex, because the brain is very good at it, processes it really fast. And so I was very practiced at the thoughts that I didn't even know were there and went straight to the feelings. And so once I could finally slow it down, like years of trying to figure this stuff out, that was helpful, first of all, to know where thoughts came from or where feelings came from. And then, okay, but this was the shift. So in the life coach school, we learned that life is 50-50, which I agree in a sense, because we are celestial beings. Like we are good. This is where I'm at now. And this is what I preach on the podcast all the time. So you are a good mom and you're in this mortal world where it's like, we're going to make mistakes. We have all these feelings we don't know what to do with. We're pitching fits along with the kids, all the things. Mm-hmm. And so you are a good mom and you just yelled at your kids. And so I think trying to wrap our heads around what is happening in this earth life, like we describe it as 50-50, because our experience is 50-50, like 50% of the time we behave and 50% of the time we don't. But I just wasn't like jiving with explaining it like half the time I'm a good mom, half the time I'm a bad mom. And I was like, I know that that's not really true. And so Crystal helped me understand, because she asked me this. She is the coach who said, on a scale of 1 to 10, like, how good of a mom are you, or whatever he asked me. And I'm like, this morning, yesterday, just not, like tomorrow, like when? Because I was basing it on my actions. And so if I had like completely lost my shiz this morning, then I'm like a 1 out of 10 mom in my rating system. But I don't even know what you were trying to teach me. So that's what I want you to explain, is your 10 out of 10, like how you explain that, because I went and took it off in my own little spin, but I would love to have you explain it.
So I think part of it is like, for the 50-50 concept for me isn't about good and bad behavior. 50-50 for me, because I don't think there is like quote unquote good and bad behavior, as in I'm not a bad person because I did something wrong. Right. And I think whenever we use the terms good and bad, that's what we think. We're just like, oh, okay, well, I did something wrong and I'm bad. I think just as our kids are doing their best, which I truly believe, I believe the same about us with our personality, our mood, what's been happening to us, like all of the factors factored in at that moment, even if that moment doesn't look amazing for me as a parent, that is still my best. And that is still my child's best. And that's what I choose to believe. And that's what I choose to preach. But for me, the 50-50 is more about emotions. It's more about half of my life, I'm going to be feeling these kind of bigger, more intense, maybe a little bit more heavy emotions. And half of the time, I'm going to feel those like happy, peace, calm, content emotions. And that nothing has gone wrong when I'm feeling either of the spectrum of that emotions, that it's totally fine. And that as we start to like lean into that, like, it's not a problem when I feel shame. It's not a problem when I feel anger, even as a parent. The problem comes when we don't allow it, when we resist it, when we react to it. And the reactions come from unhealed spaces. So that's what I help people with now, is uncovering like, what is the trigger? Why did that trigger me in the first place? And how can I heal that thing that just got brought up? I always have people, when they come into my program, I run a program called Parent School for 4 months. And when people come in, I always ask them to rank themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 on their parenting. And it's not because that number is like true, or it doesn't really have anything to do with the number, but it has to do with like all of the thoughts that get pulled out. So people will come in and they'll say they're like a 1 or a 3 or a 5 or whatever. And usually I ask them for an average, because sometimes they feel like they're a 1 and sometimes they feel like they're an 11, right? So they come up with some sort of an average, and then it starts to pull out all of the different thoughts that they have about themselves and about their parenting. And a lot of them don't fall in line with like, I'm doing my best. A lot of them fall in line with, I should be doing better. I could be doing more. I'm not doing enough. Maybe because I work a lot with generational healing, a lot of people feel like even though they understand generational healing and they want to be adding to that healing, they actually feel like they're doing the opposite and they're adding more baggage that their children are going to have to go through instead of less. There's a lot of like heavy thoughts that we can have there. So just like you mentioned, our thoughts create our feelings and our feelings fuel our actions. Most parenting supports focus on that do. It's like, what mantras do I say to my kid? And do I look them in the eye? And how much time am I spending a day connecting with them? That's not what it's about. It's about like my thoughts and my feelings. And so when we can dig out, how am I thinking about myself? And then change that, it changes everything. And so people feel like they have to, in order to be a 10 out of 10 mom, for them, it feels like it's really far away. They have to be perfect. They have to like not yell at their kids. They have to like never feed their kids cereal for dinner or like forget them at school or like all the things that we think being a good mom is. We all have a different expectation of what that is. And then it's unattainable because it's like literally impossible. It's impossible to just be perfect all the time. And even if it was, that actually wouldn't be supportive for us either, because I've talked to people whose parents were quote unquote perfect and they have super big anger and shame problems because they never saw their parents freak out or yell, or not even just freak out or yell, but show any emotion. And so they still weren't taught the things that they needed to in order to become emotional, intelligent adults themselves. So I think this way of parenting is really just like, how can I be more kind to myself, more loving to myself, more compassionate to myself, and believe that a 10 out of 10 mom might look a little bit different than I thought it did. It might look like I'm still making mistakes, I'm still failing, but I'm getting up and I'm moving forward and I'm trying again and I'm loving myself throughout that process.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you suggested that it could even be possible that I was a 10 out of 10 mom, I immediately rejected that because I know I can't be perfect. And 10 out of 10 mom sounded like that means I'm
like
perfect.
Perfection.
Yeah. And I'm like, I've long ago accepted that's not ever going to happen. And so to just reframe it as, like
as human, as
good.
at 10 out of 10, I'm still a human.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm still a human with
On
all
the
my human
scale.
stuff.
Yeah.
And I think the difference for me is that I love myself anyways. I'm
Mhm.
confident anyways. I'm compassionate to myself anyways. And I know how to move through those heavy times. And I think 10 out of 10 mom is just believing that I am. And 10 out of 10 for me also looks like I do make mistakes. The reason why is because as I make those mistakes and as I move through them in helpful ways, as I learn how to do that in a really healed way, then I show my kids how to do it too, right? Instead of just going into like a shame spiral of like, I'm the worst ever. And now I'm just going to lock myself in my room and watch Netflix and like eat potato chips for the next 3 days or whatever, and like yell at my kids even more. I'm moving into like, oh, yeah, I did do something that I don't love. I did just hurt my child there. I'm going to go apologize. I'm going to reconnect. I'm going to take emotional responsibility for what I did, and I'm going to move on. And it's going to show them exactly how they can respond to their failure, to their, what we're really talking about here is shame, but that idea of like, there's something wrong with me, right? We can help them move through that emotion that as humans, we all feel in a healthy way.
Yeah. And that's what it all shifted for me, is that the shame is that there's something wrong with you. And even like thinking of myself as a 50-50 mom, I was like, there's 50% something wrong with me still, And so now I'm like, no, I'm 100%, I am a 10 out of 10 mom. And that also means like that I am human, but there's nothing wrong with me. And literally modeling it is the only way to teach our kids. Like when you ask somebody, well, what's your job even as a mom? Like, what is your job? Well, to teach my kids how to this and that and the other. And it's like, you can't teach them anything. Like all you do is model for them. And if what you're trying to teach them doesn't align with what you're modeling, it just bounces right off their front. Charlie Brown, like they don't hear you.
Modeling is the teaching.
Yes.
When people are like, well, how do I teach my kids? Anything that you want to
do
teach
it.
them is going to come through modeling. And I say 80-20. So I say like 80% of it's modeling. It might even be closer to 90. And then 10, maybe 20% is part of like having conversations with them or reading them books or telling them stories or giving them advice or telling them something that happened to you or whatever. Like we can still have place for that as parents for sure, but that's not most of how they're learning. Most of how they're learning is actually through like that social, like through us, through them modeling what it is that we're showing them.
Yeah. And so it's very frightening. I look at my daughters and I'm like, they're little mirrors of me, you know, they literally say things that I say and they react in ways that I react. And I'm like, oh, well, there's some good work that I can work on, because if I don't like that she's doing it, she picked it up for me. I mean, we can't take 100% responsibility for anything. Like if we're going to take the blame, or we're going to take the credit, we also have to take the blame. But there is definitely, those pieces in there.
Well, I think so that concept is like personalization. It's like making my kids' behavior mean something about me because they did something wrong, because they did something right. And it's separating those two things. We're really enmeshed when we have babies because we are so connected to them and that we literally are in charge of everything for them. And so it's separating those two things, their behavior and my behavior, who I am and who they are. And obviously I'm still going to influence them. And I do bring influence to the table all the time, but not every single thing that they do is because of a direct reflection of what I do. And if we can separate those two things, it actually helps us to parent better.
Yeah. But to your point, my daughter is like very into shame lately. Like, and she's always, in fact, I remember getting coached with you about blame because she was very into blame and now it's like shifted into shame, And so
they're the same thing.
Yeah.
So it hasn't even shifted. It's just shown up in a different way.
Yes, exactly. And so she she knows that I'm like always talking about you are a good mom. And so she'll be like banging on the door and you're telling people you're a good mom, but you're a terrible mom. She's and so she is like, anyway, we just had these conversations on the way to gymnastics or whatever, where I'm like, why I say I am a good mom? Because I am, like, it's who I am. And you are a good girl. You are. It's just who you are. And she's like, no, every minute I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing. And I'm like, oh, like it's this mindset switch that I want to switch on like every person on the planet, that like what you're doing does not reflect on who you are. It's just what you're doing.
And the only way to switch that on every person on the planet is to switch that on us.
I know. And so I'm like constantly trying to like remind myself of this and just hope it rubs off on her. And, that 10%, like every now and then, like say it as if hopefully someday it'll sink in, but really to like be working on myself. Because like you said, like that is all there is to it. Like once we can regulate ourselves, then that is co-regulation. Once we can like manage our own emotions, we teach them how to manage their emotions, not like, hey, let's do this little trick you learned at school, which is very awesome, by the way, like smell the soup and then blow the soup is like, all the little tricks to try to regulate.
Yeah, they can all be really helpful, but you will come up with those yourself from a different space. Like you'll create those amazing solutions for your own kids that will work for them, or you'll search out different ideas for that, but it'll come from a different space once we start changing the thinking and the feeling. And so when I talk about healing, what I mean by healing is uncovering those thoughts and those feelings that have come from our childhood, that have come like that maybe we've passed down, that we've been bringing with us. And that is why we're currently triggered. So a trigger is always connected to shame. So, and by trigger, I mean, if you're ever with your kids and you're feeling like a strong emotional charge inside, that's a trigger. And it's not because they did something, but there's some kind of underlying belief there that we need to dig up. So it's doing that work, uncovering what those beliefs are and healing that space that is so helpful in our parenting journey.
Yeah. So I'm just reminded of like when you were coaching me about being a 10 out of 10 mom, that I would try on that thought. And so during the day, I'd be like, well, I am a 10 out of 10 mom. And then it really did change my action line, And so as I've developed more and more about like my belief about who I am, okay, so here's my framework. Let me tell you this real quick, because this is what I think we do as coaches, right? Because you do the same thing. I just call it recharging your AAA batteries. So the first A is awareness, right? We do a lot of awareness in coaching. And the second one is acceptance, which, me, like Crystal was always trying to like peel off the layers of shame. I'm like, and I know I'm doing that. And I know I'm doing it. So she's like, let's just take one layer off the top. The acceptance part is really, really big. And so basically my whole podcast is all about the acceptance, because once we get the awareness, then we judge it. And so if we can like take that layer of judgment off and accept that we are humans, accept that we are going to make mistakes, accept that we are a 10 out of 10 and that we did whatever or feel whatever or whatever. And then once we have acceptance, then we go into alignment. And everyone just wants to skip to the alignment phase, which is the action line, which is the like living into who you've always been. Like, that's how I look at it. Because like you said, becoming something is like so far out there. Like, I want to be a better mom. I want to be a good mom, as if that's unattainable, you know, the huge long list of expectations that we put on ourselves. And so I just like shuffled all that around in my brain. And instead of it's like way out there, it's inside me. It's who I am. Like the marble, I'm like chipping away at the marble to find David inside, you know, like it's so.
Yeah, I love that. And I use those same 3 words, acceptance and alignment. And what was the third one?
Awareness was the first.
Awareness.
Yeah.
And I think that in parenting, the most helpful thing in those 3 aspects is to do that in our body. And what I mean by that is like not so much be focusing on our thoughts. Like we can work on that for sure. And that's a really helpful and important part of it. But awareness of how I'm feeling in my body. So this can be like, am I feeling a little bit agitated or irritated or frustrated? Am I feeling kind of sad or hurt or whatever? And being aware of how that actually physically feels in my body. And then noticing when I'm out of alignment, being like, okay, I'm not feeling great right now, because that is when our worst parenting moments comes, when we keep reacting and responding when our body's telling us to stop, when our body's telling us we need something different. And then once we can shift that, and it comes from that acceptance piece, we like allow it and feel it and kind of sit with it. I really love meditation, but there's a lot of other things out there that can help you with that piece. Then we can move into in a more aligned way. And really that's all we need in parenting. All we need to do is to be, whenever we're unaligned, noticing that we're not, and then finding a way that works for us personally to get us back into alignment again. Because the kind of parenting that we're talking about here comes naturally from an aligned space.
Yeah.
Like it just does. And I've coached people who've never heard about this kind of parenting before, ever. I coached this one lady, and we did it on a YouTube live. And she does like recipes and stuff. Like she'd never heard of this parenting style. And she's like, wait a second, let's like do a example. And so she talked to me about her daughter, and we went through it. And once we kind of moved through it and we went back to, okay, well, in that scenario again, now that you're feeling this way, what would you do? And she said all of the same steps that would be in those books. She was like, oh, I would understand she was doing her best. I probably would pause and wait and not even respond to her in that moment. I would just wait until later. And even if I might not even have to bring it up, like it might have already, like come full circle. And it's fascinating to me that no matter who I coach on anything, that they move to the space of what we read in books. Like I don't read a lot of parenting books anymore now, because I just don't feel like I need them as much, but I used to read them all the time. And I'm like, this is what the books are saying, but it's not important to read what the books are saying. It's to figure out like what healing needs to happen inside myself, so that I just naturally do what the books are saying. And I think that's what a lot of them were missing for me, at least when I was reading them.
Yeah, exactly. That totally describes for me too. Totally. Okay. So there's a couple other things, but we'll have to talk about it another time. So tell people how they can find you and about your new exciting offer that just finished this morning.
Exciting venture. So you can find me on Instagram at the.parenting.coach. And my podcast is called the Parenting Coach Podcast with Crystal. And these are the kinds of things that I talk about. So I talk about kind of the science behind it, the research behind it, what connection-based parenting is. And then I combine that with thought work, and also with more somatic work and mindfulness and meditation and stuff like that. So that's really what I feel like it is. I think everything just boils down to those feelings of shame, those feelings of heaviness, and learning how to move through them in our body. So my new exciting venture is that I just came out with a book. It's a mindset journal for parents. It's called Burn This Book, because it's like a book that you don't just have to keep forever. You don't pass it down to your posterity, but it is going to guide you in a daily practice. So every morning you wake up, and all these things that we've been talking about, it's going to teach you them, and it will have a guided practice every single day with some extra tools at the back. It's cool because it's kind of an interactive journal. So it's going to have QR codes that you can scan, so you can go watch videos that describe the concepts in a little bit more detail if you are struggling. And I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it's totally awesome. So I'll have all the links to all that in the show notes. And just thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So good to talk to you again. Been a minute.
You too.
And I just laugh, because as I listen to you talk, I'm like, yeah. I've just been regurgitating Crystal. You can tell when you listen to her. It's like
We can
the
just
same thing.
talk about, I think we could just talk about this all day. We could have like
I
a
know.
15-hour podcast about
For sure.
all of
But
these
my
things.
3-year-old just walked in, so we can't do that. All right. Okay. See you next
Thanks, Emily.